I kind of don't feel quite ready to preach. I just feel there's lots of joy this morning here. I just think we need to kind of like rejoice more, but maybe we'll leave time for that afterwards because I just so love it when people are baptized. We've all come from different environments here now, and some of us have had a bad week. Some of us will be struggling with all kinds of issues. And yet hardly any of us probably can't rise to that hope when we see someone being baptized and you just think, yes, all my life he's been faithful. And when it's all over, we'll look back at these light and momentary troubles and you'll laugh in their face. And it's just good, isn't it, to be reminded that that's true. All these light and momentary troubles, you'll laugh at how we made such a big thing of them. And I just think that's such an important thing to be reminded of, that hope. All my life, Lord, you've been faithful. Yeah, I just want to sing it again, really, but maybe we can sing it again afterwards. Well, the writer Mark Twain, he once said, "It's not the bits of the Bible I don't understand that bother me." Some bits are just kind of like fairly obvious, aren't they? We all love stories of kindness, heroic kindness, bravery. I mean, I love them, you love them. It just lifts us, doesn't it? I was reading this week of the amazing story of this girl badly injured in the Manchester bombing, but who said to a member of the transport police, she herself was bleeding from head to toe. She says, "What can I do to help? What can I do to help in the middle of that carnage?" Just the bravery of that girl, herself badly injured, but being concerned for someone else. It warms the hearts of everyone when we read those stories. The ex-policeman Andrew Parker won the George Medal posthumously when he became known as the Human Bridge during the Zeebrugge ferry disaster. 20 people escaped drowning as they walked across his own body that he held on for people to walk across, but was unable to make it himself. I'm thinking of people in London from the church we came to, who God softened their hearts towards the needy in central London, and how every Tuesday and Thursday they would open up the church and serve coffee and get in healthcare people for people who could help people on the streets who were vulnerable, make sure they got their medications, they get checked up. The NHS would bring a van and park it outside in the middle of the Westway, heading into the West End, as people would queue up because members of the church wanted to give their time to do it. And you read those stories and it warms our hearts. Everyone loves those things. We're all moved by acts of kindness. I think it's something about doing something for somebody that you're not going to get rewarded for. No one's going to give you lots of money for doing it. And that makes it special that you did it for no other reason. You do it not because anyone's going to notice. None of these people wanted to be noticed for what they did. And that's what warms our hearts. They did it without wanting something or even recognition for what they had done. Doing something that no one would ever find out about. They didn't need to do it. No one would have thought less of them if they hadn't done it. And it's all of that kind of warms us when we read of those stories. And it's tempting in this passage, in this parable that we've had read, the sheep and the goats, it's tempting to find some deep hidden meaning, to stretch out a sermon to last at least half an hour by finding hidden nuances that you didn't really know were in there. But that would be a mistake, wouldn't it? Because Mark Twain was right. It's not the bits of the Bible we don't understand that should bother us. It's the bits that we do understand. There's nothing deep or complicated. There is no hidden nuance in this parable that gives you some inner revelation of something you hadn't really seen already. Jesus tells us this parable. He says it's on the judgment day, all will stand before God, because it's true, we will. Everyone will stand before God. There are other judgment parables. This isn't all there is to say about the last judgment. It's just a piece that Jesus wants, a piece of the puzzle Jesus wants us to know about. And he says, it'll be like this. In verse 32, 33, he says the sheep and the goats, it was common to graze sheep and goats together as one herd. It was more economic to do that. But goats actually were less hardy than sheep. And so in the evening, they would have to separate the sheep and the goats in order to put the goats would go inside and the sheep could stay outside because they could cope with that. So this is a common image that Jesus' hearers would have understood. Yes, we understand that you have to separate the sheep from the goats. You can graze them together during the day, but in the evening you have to separate them. So this is familiar territory to Jesus' hearers. They understand where he's coming from, to separate out. And he puts the sheep on the right, the goats on the left. What's the difference between the two? The sheep have been faithful to their master. They've been faithful to Jesus. Jesus told them to care for those in need, and they have done that. They've been faithful to the command that Jesus gave them. The goats, on the other hand, they're the ones that saw the need but didn't do anything about it. It's interesting that neither realized that it was Jesus. None of them said, oh, yeah, we realized that we were doing it for the Lord. They weren't doing it. Neither of them did it for, or didn't do it for anyone else. The goats are those that simply saw the need but didn't do anything about it. And this is one of the parables that just sums up for us the Christian responsibility to a social conscience. It awakens a social conscience in us to love our neighbors as ourselves. Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan. This is no different. He's simply saying the one who truly loves me is the one that's going to do what I've asked you to do. That's the thing. It's just doing what Jesus would have done himself. Now, Jesus is not saying here, as some people make out, that we're actually saved by doing good things. It's popular in the West, particularly, for some people to say, actually, what this really shows us is that all that matters is that you're a nice, kind, loving person. And actually, that's what matters. And okay, you might not call yourself a Christian, but actually you were doing it for Jesus even though you didn't realize you were doing it for Jesus, and that's okay. That is not true. That is not what this passage is telling us at all. Some people say, well, serving the poor is really serving Christ, even if they didn't mean to or realize it. It's a false view. You can't stretch every parable to mean everything. And nowhere else does Jesus say that people are saved by anything other than believing and trusting in what Jesus Christ has done through his reconciling us to God on the cross. Jesus holds the hand of the Father. He stretches out the other hand to anyone that wants to take it. And when you put your hand in his, like Tony's done, like so many here have done, when you put your hand in his, Jesus reconciled us to the Father. That's how it works. And there's no other way that we come into a relationship with God other than putting our hand into the hand of Jesus. No amount of good works will do the same thing. They're good to do, but that's not how anyone has a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's not what Jesus is saying here. He's saying, how do you know? How can you tell a true Christian from somebody who just likes to talk about it? And he's saying, well, actually, it's the one who does the will of my Father. And Jesus told lots of other parables that say the same thing. He said, a man had two sons. He says to them both, go and work in my field for a day. The first son says, yes, I will go, but doesn't go. The second son said, I'm not going to go. But later on he changed his mind and he does go. And Jesus says, which of these two did the will of his Father? And the people replied, well, the one who actually did what you told them. Even though they said no at first, they actually did it. So this parable is completely in keeping with all of Jesus' teaching. It's not saying that you're saved by doing good works, but the only real demonstration that you've been truly saved is that something is awakened in you to the needs of the poor and the needy around us. And we could finish there and just say, so is my attitude, is something coming alive in me that demonstrates a caring and a love and a commitment to those who are less fortunate than myself? But why and how do we put it into practice? Why is this so important to Jesus? We might need to understand that if we're to really understand the motivation for doing it. Why? Why does Jesus say this is so important? And I think that people hearing what Jesus said would say the same things that we do, that I do sometimes. Well, it's very difficult. It's difficult to serve the poor. It's difficult to know how to start, isn't it? It's very difficult to know how do we really make a difference. And in any case, some people are poor because of their own bad choices. Because they are. Because some people actually have made a mess of their lives. And actually, you can be nice to people and kind to people, but is it really going to make any substantial difference? Is it going to help to transform us? We can make all those same kind of excuses and things that we would do. Jesus says, I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. But even if you feed someone today, they'll be hungry tomorrow. The causes of hunger are systemic. How can we make a difference? Jesus said, I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. But if you give someone something to drink today, they'll be thirsty again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after, and on it goes. How can we make any substantial difference to it? I was a stranger, says Jesus, and you welcomed me in. But there's so many strangers in a town like this. How do you know which one? Can we welcome them all? Has any of us got the capacity to invite all 68,000 people in Tunbridge Wells into your home? Jesus says, I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and in prison and you visited me. We could say, yeah, but people who are in prison, they're there for a reason. It's natural consequences, justice. The point is, Jesus' hearers would have done all the same things that we go through in our minds. And we might be tempted to think, no, that's not the point. That's not the point. We just got to do what Jesus told us to do. It doesn't matter about the excuses or the reasons. But actually, that is the point. Why can Jesus tell us to be concerned for these people? Because I was hungry. Because I was thirsty. Because I was in prison. Because I was naked. And the Lord came after me. And he set me free from prison. And he clothed me with a robe of righteousness. And he fed me with the bread of life. And he gave me water to drink from the well of living water that never runs dry. Because he cares for me and heals me. Because he is my loving Father. Because everything that he's asking us to do, he has already done for me. I have experienced all those things from Jesus in my own life. When I've been hungry, when I've been thirsty, when I've been hopeless, Jesus has done that. And Jesus is now saying, I just want you to do for other people what I already did for you. I did that for you. And that's the first thing I think Jesus is wanting to turn that around and say, that's, if you want a motivation for why must we do this, because he's already done it for me. I was in prison, I was hungry, I was poor, I was naked, and he clothed me. Be merciful as your heavenly Father is merciful, because he's shown me mercy, so I show mercy to other people. But there's a second motivation here as well that Jesus gives us. He goes on in verse 35 and 36. He says, I was in prison, I was naked, I was poor. This doesn't mean Jesus is saying, I was in the poor, that somehow Jesus is saying when you serve a poor person, actually, I'm present in their life already because they're poor. You don't become a Christian because you're hungry or thirsty. You become a Christian when you put your hand in the hand of Jesus. Jesus isn't saying he's in them, but he's saying that my care for them is what I would have wanted you to do for me. Because every one of these descriptions Jesus gives us, Jesus experienced himself. Didn't he? Actually, they're a complete list of all the things that Jesus himself suffered. He was stripped naked, had his robe taken away from him, the only piece of clothing he owned. They threw dice for it. He was thirsty on the cross. He called out, I'm thirsty. He was imprisoned. He's taken he was a prisoner of King Herod, then of Pilate. He was a prisoner on false charges. He had his liberty restricted. All these things, Jesus is saying, I would like you to see me in those things because I was that person. And that's why it's close to my heart, because I know what it's like to be poor, to be hungry, to be naked. I was those things. And I want you to see that when you serve others, imagine that it's me, because it was me at one time. That's the second motivation Jesus wants to give us. Why? If we needed motivation. If his command wasn't enough, he gives us those two motivations. But how? How do we do this? And we're tempted to say it all depends on the circumstances. It's very difficult. We have to sort of work it all out. But actually, the point is, Jesus' parable is saying it's about doing something. This isn't something that you can just philosophize about or have some nice ideas about. It's about doing practical acts of service for people. And it is hard. It is difficult. But it doesn't mean that we can't do things. The year before I arrived in central London, there'd been the tragic case of a Christian organization that had they fed people who were on the streets, and they cared for them. But a new helper had joined them a couple of weeks before and didn't really know the rules. And somebody came and asked for money. They gave them money. And this person went out and brought a ton of stuff that they didn't need to be buying, and became unconscious during the night and died of hypothermia. And the local paper ran the story, "Christian charity kills the homeless." It is difficult. Make no mistake. It's difficult to know how to do this. Well, then it's going to be difficult. But what it doesn't do is let anyone off the hook. None of us can say, but it's difficult, so we go, no, it's difficult, and we have to find a way. Yes, it is a challenge, but that doesn't excuse us from coming under the scripture that Jesus clearly shares with us. And it is true that in the West, we do need to understand just how much we have. You've probably heard these things about if all the world were a village. Have you heard that? Imagining that the world was shrunk just to 100 people living in one solitary village, and how the proportions of different people would look if you had a village of just 100 people. The whole world's population shrunk to just 100 people. In your village, you would have 57 would be Asian, 21 would be Europeans, 14 would be American, and 8 would be Africans. There would be 48 men and 52 women. 30 people would be Christians, 70 would be non-Christians. 6 people in your village would own just under 60% of all the wealth, and they would all come from the USA. 80 would be living in poverty, 70 will be illiterate, 50 will be malnourished, 3 will own a computer, and 1 will have a university degree. My guess is we're a little unbalanced in our village here this morning. If you have food in your fridge and a roof over your head, clothes on your back, and somewhere to sleep tonight, you are better off than 75% of your village. If you have a bank account and money in your purse or wallet, you are in the top 8 of wealth in your village. So look at our community compared to that, and it gives you a perspective. And we understand that Jesus' concern and heart for the poor is because God has created everybody, and he creates everything, and nothing is rubbish, and nothing is useless, and God desires that all should be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. We know that God desires for every human person the same things. He's not prejudiced towards Christians. He loves everyone. He doesn't love your Muslim friend any less than he loves someone devoted to Christ, serving day and night. He loves everyone. But I think we can think of 3 things that we can do. 3 things that we can do in response to this. And you may have heard this before, but I find it helpful because we often talk about tithing our money. But we all have 3 things that we can actually use to serve the poor and the needy in the way that Jesus is saying. We all have a certain amount of time, we all have certain talents, and we've all got a certain amount of treasure. Time, talents, treasure. We talk a lot about tithing our treasure, What about tithing our time? And what about tithing our talents? What about giving 10%, as it were, of my time? If I think about my free time during the week where I'm not expected to work, it doesn't leave very much really in this church. But what if I gave 10% of that free time to some kind of activity that is serving others? That's a challenge for me as it is for you. But as I've thought about this, I was thinking, we talk so much about tithing our money, but we all have time, we all have treasure, and we all have talents. And these are very practical things. Time is the one thing that most of us don't have much of. But can I give some time? Do I need to find something that actually I can give some hours to on a regular basis? Am I using my time in some way to serve people in the way that Jesus is asking? What about my talents? Some of us may have counseling, mentoring skills, the ability to fix things, to cook, to befriend others. Is there some way in which I can use my talents to serve others? Now, a word of warning about this. I think we have to be careful because I love about discovering our spiritual gifts and discovering the particular ways that God has made us to be. But I'm always slightly nervous that lets us off the hook more than it puts us on the hook. So it's not my gift to sweep up floors. It's not my gift to serve coffee. It's not my gift. Look, it's not my gift either, but sometimes you've got to do it. I used to say to my wife, Jan, it's not my gift to read bedtime stories to the children. It's not my gift. I just don't feel particularly gifted at it. I can't do the funny voices, and I'm just not very good at all of that. It's not my gift. But guess what? You have to do things. So we have to be careful, but, it's a good place to start. What talents have I got that I can bring to bear? Jesus talked about the parable of the talents, just literally a couple of chapters earlier in Matthew's gospel. He says, are you using the talents God has given you to benefit others? And I think those talents are, because these things are, I know some of us are gifted in terms of management expertise, strategic development, but all these things Jesus mentioned are kind of like getting your hands dirty, aren't they? When I was at school, my school was on the River Thames, and I was in the rowing team. For a year, I was in the first 8. Rowing in the Thames is great fun, and one day, you need to know that the boathouse was overlooked by this older guy called Harry. Harry was a real East Ender Cockney, and his language was unbelievable. I don't know how, he would never get away with it today. But we all kind of loved Harry, but we were dead scared of him because he was very fierce and could swear like anything at us. So anyway, we had this day, disastrous day. The Cocks missed the tide. We had just gone up to slightly beyond Hammersmith Bridge, tried to turn. The tide was coming in really fast, and the boat hit the left-hand pillar of Hammersmith Bridge, full on, cracked, and quite quickly began to sink. We were all okay. They launch motor launch comes out and rescues you, and some of us were clinging to the boat before it finally sank. And we thought, we just got over that. Then we have to face Harry, the boatman. And he's waiting for us on the pontoon. And you can see him shaking his head like this already. And we're freezing cold. We've been in the water. It's freezing cold. But no, we're all lined up on this pontoon. And he starts. I can't remember how he started. I can't remember how he finished. But it was quite an academic school in some ways. And he just was going on. You say, you have 8,000 O-levels and 58,000 A-levels, but you can't a boat. And so what he said, I don't know what it is with you kids. He said, you think you're so smart because you can pass all your exams. But all this was with masses of expletives going on in it. And then he sort of finished off saying, I bet you know all these exams you passed, but you probably couldn't even wire a plug. And we all look at each other kind of thinking, I don't think I do know how to wire a plug. It's kind of really is the point. Why am I telling you this long story? I didn't mean it to be that long. It's just that Harry's right, isn't it, really? 20,000 O-levels and 40,000 A-levels, but we couldn't even wire a plug. We couldn't even steer a boat. Well, actually, it wasn't my job to steer. I was rowing stroke. It was the Cox, actually. He missed the turn. But anyway, no harm came of it. Nobody drowned, and it just cost somebody a lot of money. Did I tell you it was a brand new boat? It was a brand new fiberglass boat, like carbon fiberglass boat. Our finest moment. I was dropped from the first date after that, sadly. The point is, Jesus is saying it's actually very practical. Yeah, what good is it if you do know all about the theological ins and outs of the synoptics? What happens if you can actually exposit all that Jesus meant about Matthew 25? What happens but you actually don't know how to help another person? What good is it? That's the point. And I speak to myself more than anyone else, because I probably do understand a little bit about the synoptics and the theology that undergirds it. But what's the point of all that, Jesus is saying? Anyone can give someone a hot drink. Any one of us knows how to do that, whether it's your gift or not. Time, talents, and treasure we can give. If you give regularly to Christ Church, then quite a bit of what you give already goes to support ministries serving the poor and people who would otherwise not have the money to do what they do. And I think there's something important about what Jesus is saying here that we can only do together. It is difficult individually to know how to respond, but as a body together, we can respond. We can't all go and visit in prison, but somebody can. And if we're part of the body of Christ, then we're one. So in a way, I can't maybe do it, but if someone's doing it, then the church is doing it. You don't all have to do everything, because as a body, we're one body. When one suffers, we all suffer. If one does it, we all do it, effectively, because we're all one. But what am I doing? And I think that we can actually, as a church, it's one of the things that helps us today, because it is difficult to know how to help those in need. It's difficult to identify who those are in need. But actually, when churches like ours together can organize things, we can make sure that we're serving the people who need it most. Because where we serve and partner with organizations, they can do that kind of working out. Is this the best way? Is this the right way? Is this the best way to genuinely help somebody? Or is it actually inadvertently perhaps making the situation worse, as it did for that poor illustration I gave you from the charity in London? So we encourage at Christ Church people to be involved, find things that you can do. There are some listed in our getting involved at Christ Church. Some of these are to do with serving here in church, but some of them are to do with serving in our community. You could make a start by looking at that and thinking, is there something I could do? We encourage people to serve in other areas of our local community here. Serve in council-led initiatives. Serve with some of the incredible charities that we support as a church or that you are involved with. But have you thought about maybe tithing your time? Tithing your talents to the Lord in this way? Jesus says the only way that you can really know who's really the real deal is whether they do what I've asked you to do. It's not deep and it's not hard to understand. But get involved. Get involved with partnering with somebody who's already doing it. If you don't know how to start yourself, then join an organization that's already doing it. You know that we already have a great partnership with some, with Life and Soul and other charities as well. You talk to them about how can you help? How can you get involved? Are there talents that you could give that could help? Could you give more money to support them? The most memorable sermon a curate of mine ever preached, Gordon, long before you joined us, was my good friend Will. Will Kemp is now the pastor of the Point Church in Hurstpierpoint. Will was our curate. And his passage was that where Jesus talks about prayer and fasting from earlier on in Matthew's Gospel. And Will, who was known during the cricket season not to spend as much time preparing his sermons as he maybe should, stood up and he said, the Bible says pray and fast. So, pray and fast. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And stood down. That was it. That was the sermon. We all knew he hadn't prepared it, but actually, it was the best sermon I've ever heard. What else do you say? Do it.